Hi, everyone. My name is Jordana Feldman. Welcome to Fields. We are celebrating or honoring International Women's Day with a conversation today called Home Advantage, How Early Supports Help Girls and Women Thrive in the Mathematical Science. It's going to be a great hour, and we hope that you submit your questions as you're watching. And we'd love to hear from you also in the comments. But first, we wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto and the Fields Institute operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As you may be participating from elsewhere, may we suggest that you research the history of your land using the website native-land.ca. Now, I also want to acknowledge that over the past 5 years in particular, we've seen an improved vocabulary to describe many of the structural injustices faced by underserved sections of the population. And these are intersectional concerns. These are words and arguments that now clearly describe the things that many women, racialized groups, and people in the LGBTQ community had learned to internalize as just the way things are, with the implication that while it may have been unfair, there wasn't much we could do about it, and instead we were supposed to keep busy fighting each other for the few spots available. Now there's a better articulated framework in place to help us work toward a more just society for all, because we know now that what's good for girls and women and what's good for every underserved group is actually good for everyone. But we're still having these kinds of conversations because despite all these wonderful words and intentions, we're still at what feels like the foot of a mountain. And I just want to acknowledge that the conversation we're having today is only one type of conversation. We'll be having more of them with speakers from a broad range of experiences over the next couple of weeks, months, and years. So with women still underrepresented in STEM career tracks, we have a long way to go. Attitude and self-belief are two crucial weapons in the fight to change the ratio. And one of the most critical factors that has been shown to improve the odds for success is support at home or in an early educational environment. Our guests today grew up in a math-friendly household. I'm sure you have inferred that they are related to one another. This positively influenced their eventual independent choices to pursue academic careers in mathematics. But even with this home advantage, their paths were still filled with challenges. So today we're discussing the contrast between the home environment and the systemic issues that they and their peers faced through graduate school and academic work, how their experiences compare with today's overall structure, and what more needs to be done to create the spaces where girls, women, and underrepresented groups can all thrive in the mathematical sciences. So thank you both for being here today. Deirdre Haskell was born in the US and she moved to the UK at age 11. She completed her undergrad at Oxford, then received her PhD at Stanford. And she's currently a professor of mathematics at McMaster in Hamilton and the deputy director of the Fields Institute. And as a side note, as I'm sure she'll bring up, her daughter is currently working on her PhD. Is that right? Yes.
In biostatistics.
In biostatistics. Cymra Haskell was also born in the US and also moved to the UK at age 10. She completed her undergrad at Imperial College London and also received her PhD at Stanford. She's currently professor of mathematics at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. So hello to you both, and thank you for sharing your story and having this conversation with everyone today. And before we get into the meaty stuff, can you please just introduce yourselves and speak briefly about your respective academic backgrounds?
Okay, thank you, Jordana, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I certainly never, I don't know, when I was 10 years old, I never imagined being the Deputy Director at the Fields Institute for Research in the Mathematical Sciences, but it's great to be here now. So yeah, we moved to England when I was 11, and I first went to a girls' school, and then I went to a boys' school. And then by the time I finished my high school education, I was sick of boys. So I went to a women's college. And then I went to then I went on to graduate school at Stanford, which was a very male-dominated environment. So that kind of breadth of experience, I think, ties into what we want to talk about today, which is how one's background can affect one's level of confidence or the way one can pursue a career in mathematics.
And Cymra, what about you?
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So Deirdre and I were sisters. So we grew up together. We were in the same household.
We're still sisters.
Yes.
Still sisters. Right?
Important denotation.
So I'm younger than Deirdre, a year and a half younger. So when we went to England, there were, the English educational system was going through some transitions, and they were getting rid of grammar schools and introducing, it was anyway. So the fact that I was a year behind Deirdre meant that the system had changed, and so Deirdre went to the local grammar school and I went to the local other school. And then we had all these transitions. We kept changing schools. So we did a lot of moving around. And so when she was at a girls' school, I was at a mixed sex school, but then I went to a boys' school. And then I changed yet again to another boys' school. So I was Deirdre was one of very few girls in her year. I think maybe only about 4 or something. She can remind me, but I was one of 30 with 90 boys.
So I just want to clarify, when you say you went to a boys' school, is this a school that was supposed to be an all boys school, but that had a few girls?
It was an all boys school that was being integrated. It was changing to be a mixed school. So, okay. And I was in the first year that they took girls. So they took a few dribblings of girls in the years above me, right? So so Deirdre was in one of those years, but I was the first class of girls that came in, but they had 120 students that came in, and 30 were girls and 90 were boys. And then the year after that, they made it more closer. They got closer to half and half.
Oh, it's always fun to be the guinea pig generation.
Yeah.
Huh?
Exactly. Right?
Yeah.
And then I went from there to a university that was a tech Imperial College, right? So that's a technical institute and very male dominated, very much, and then I was at Stanford with Deirdre again.
So I want to talk more about the experience, because those are some fairly extreme circumstances in terms of gender division. Not everyone has that, where not only are you changing environments often, but you're the first female cohort of a newly integrated boys' school. And those definitely have impacts, especially depending on where you grow up. But the one thing you also shared is that you came from an academic household, which absolutely shapes attitudes toward education and perhaps confidence in education and academia. But Deirdre, you said that both your parents were actually professors of modern languages, and yet you both ended up in math. How did that happen?
So our parents being in modern languages and in academia, they felt very strongly that it was a very difficult time for modern languages as a discipline in academia. And they pushed us very hard towards science. So they were saying, don't go into languages. There are no jobs. You should be going into science. So in fact, we have also another brother and sister. We all ended up in science of some kind or another. So definitely, although they didn't know math, they definitely were pushing science very hard. I was commenting to Cymra yesterday that other people get pushed to be doctors or lawyers. They would have been happy if we'd been doctors or lawyers as well, but they really pushed academia on us. And it helped a lot to have that academic background, to have an understanding for how the system works, to know that being a mathematician is, or at least being a math professor, is a possible job. I mean, other people don't even know that. And so we definitely had an advantage. But I'd actually like to say a word about the environment, because our parents were very supportive about us and talked a lot about peer pressure and not giving in to peer pressure. But it made this difference to be in this environment with being in a school where I was the only girl in a class of 30 boys. the result, one of the results for me was that I simply refused to bow to any stereotype at all. And so if a stereotype was put in front of me, then my reaction was to say, I'm not doing that. And so this in a way made it easy to say, well, girls don't do math, well, therefore I'm doing it. I had this antagonistic reaction to it. And that was made easier by the fact that I wasn't surrounded by people who were telling me, it was the adversaries who were telling me that I should not be successful at something. It wasn't the people who were on my side who was telling me that I should not be successful at something. I think that's a lot of trouble that girls have in school today, which is that the people who should be supporting them, like their friends, are telling them the opposite. They're telling them you should not be good at math. And that's the wrong thing. So kind of always, everybody should be supporting their friends to achieve their best at whatever they're good at. It doesn't have to conform to a stereotype.
Where do you think that idea comes from, that girls aren't good at math or aren't supposed to be good at math? Because it's prevalent. And I think even if it's not stated explicitly anymore, it comes out in other ways. For example, we encourage, or at least when I was still in school, girls were encouraged to pursue areas that they felt comfortable in or they were good at, like languages or English. And there was full support for that. But if you weren't good at math and you were a girl, it was just sort of understood that perhaps that was just the way things were. And there wasn't a structure in place to help push through that anxiety or belief. So I'm just curious, where do you think now, as educators in mathematics, this idea is coming from?
I think I have no idea. I'm not sure I have an answer to that at all. That's a very good question. Deirdre, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I would say that I think there are two things in there. One is that in our culture, as opposed to, say, for example, the Chinese or Korean culture, it's taken, the attitude is that math is hard for everybody. So everybody finds math hard, and that's considered to be somehow acceptable. So, I mean, as a mathematician, the thing that always happens, you go to a party and you say, I'm a mathematician, and the person says, oh, that was my worst subject at school. It's like, everybody says that. So that, and within our culture, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say that, but especially girls. And so why especially girls? I think that we have our culture says that girls are qualitative, are sympathetic, are good at things which involve empathy and the emotions, and boys are good at things which involve being quantitative, being precise, and being maybe possibly more organized. And that's, I don't know where it comes from, but that's what our culture says about the division between girls and boys.
I've actually always said that one reason I ended up in math was because I found it easier than things like English. But English, I never knew what the right answer was. I never knew that. Or at least math, I felt sure.
I mean, I haven't read any studies on any qualitative differences in the capacity of girls versus boys to learn a particular subject. But even anecdotally, it was very clear that there were some students who happened to be girls or happened to be boys who were better at math than others. And I don't think that was a gender difference. However, in terms of representation, that number of girls who started pursuing math as the grades got higher and as we went into university started to dwindle. And I just wonder if, you know, all of those girls who enjoyed math, as you both did, had a different environment coming up and different vocabulary used to describe their relationship to math and studying math, if that ratio would have looked different. And of course, this is all speculative, but I do think there's a relationship. And we can circle back to, I think, talking a little bit more about what you were discussing earlier about peer pressure versus support. You started talking about how that's played out in your lives, but I'd be curious to know if there was anything you noticed at a systemic level versus individuals who may or may not have been supportive.
yeah, I think this is an important point, because I felt always, certainly growing up in school, that at the individual level, my teachers were always supportive of me. I never felt that my teachers were telling me that I could not do math. At the same time, I felt that the system was not supportive and was making assumptions. So when I switched from a girls' school to a boys' school, one thing that happened was that the new school had streams in both math and in French. And my grades coming from my previous school were the same. I mean, I had top grades in both subjects, and I was put in the top stream for French and the middle stream for math. So without knowing anything at all about me except my report card, the school assumed that a girl or coming from a girls' school, my training in math could not be as good as my training in French. And so my ability could not be as good. And so that's what I see at the systemic level, is assumptions being made by people who don't know me personally versus the way that individuals treat me.
But did you ever challenge that? Did you ever challenge that when you were a student? I know that's hard, but
what I should have done was gone home to my parents and said they put me in the top stream for French and the middle stream for math, and then they would have argued with the school and it would have changed. But I just didn't do that. I don't really know why not, but
Deirdre did challenge things like that, though. The nature of her personality. Maybe she didn't challenge that one, but she challenged others.
And that, that opens another stream of questioning about, what type of personality is required for a girl facing this kind of, I was going to use a word that I shouldn't use, but you know what I'm talking about, this perhaps unfair situation. Would you have to have that kind of feistiness and that kind of, rebellious streak in order to stand up in the face of something like that?
I think what you need is assertiveness and confidence, not necessarily feistiness necessarily. Maybe
I would actually say that I don't think either Cymra or I would be described as feisty.
But certainly a level. I mean, the field is competitive, but I don't think I suspect that all academic fields are competitive. I'm not sure that math is any less competitive or any more competitive than any other fields. But so you just have to be willing to navigate that competitiveness. So I don't think that by itself explains why women are not in math, the competitiveness of it, but it does. It's an issue. It's part of the issues, and it's a major reason I see that many women leave the discipline, is they don't want to deal with the competitive nature of it.
And that brings up an interesting question, because math is competitive, and I find that a lot of the highly desirable fields are also very competitive. And there's two ways to look at it. And the first is that competition is necessary in order to achieve excellence, which is a legitimate argument. A field progresses by virtue of the people who are really working in tandem with, competition in order to get what they need. There's also an attitude in math, and Deirdre, you're the one that told me about this, where the idea of fun in the math community is to put on a competition. Like, it's literally there in the word used to describe the fun thing as a competition. But what is the boundary between healthy competition that inspires excellence and perhaps the point where it becomes toxic and exclusionary to everyone who doesn't have the same opportunities?
Yeah, it's a really hard one. And I think the part of the problem is it might vary from individual to individual, what that boundary is, right? So you're trying to make systemic changes that work for everybody, and then it's different for everybody. So that's a problem, right? I think what's important is that yes, there continue to be competitions, and but that there also be lots and lots of ways of collaborative activities. And I think as a discipline, we're getting better about that, about having more collaborative activities. But still, like, even in many ways, there's so much room to improve. Even in things like our teaching, that we do it, the culture is that we do it independently. We don't work with other people and visit each other's classes to think how we can teach better, right? So we just, if the culture is that this is something you're supposed to manage by yourself, and you shouldn't even ask for materials from other people necessarily, right? To improve everybody's teaching. That's just the culture of the discipline, which is kind of crazy, right? Which when anybody, we could do a better job altogether if we were more collaborative about it. So I don't know, I think it's just making sure that there are other venues so that you don't have to be, that the competition isn't the only thing, right? Somehow.
And is it like this because it's competitive? So people are trying to maintain their own personal advantage? Or is it just something that has evolved that way over time?
I think people don't want to, it's not that they're trying to maintain a competitive advantage, is that they don't want to show that they don't know the best way to do it. Right? They don't want to admit that they don't have the best way to do it, or that they even, and I mean, there are other issues in terms of the teaching example. I mean, but yeah, I think that's the main issue.
Deirdre, do you have that same experience?
I hadn't thought about that point that Cymra had made, but it's absolutely right that just like, okay, as a graduate student, you're just told, okay, you go start teaching this course and nobody's going to give you any advice about how to do it, which is pretty strange, actually. But I'd like to actually go back to the competition thing, because I think that it's a good point to make for in schools to see that a part of our problem in our culture with math altogether is that it's seen as very dry. Teachers will give math homeworks as math problems as a punishment, and just doing problem after problem can be. I mean, it's really important to practice, as in anything. To play a musical instrument, you have to practice. You have to practice your scales. And to do math, you have to practice arithmetic. You have to practice algebra. But it should also be that there should be fun bits in there. And what we tend to do is to say, oh, well, to have fun, let's participate in a math competition. And that's not necessarily fun for everybody. There should be other ways to make it fun, and all sorts of just different things that you can do. You can do a cipher club, or you can do codes and secret writing. You can do math fairs with elementary school kids. There are so many fun things to do that somehow they get covered up, and for competitions to be the only way in which we have fun is, in the end, it weeds out all these other people. And I guess a point I want to make here too is that, which actually relates to something you said at the beginning, Jordana, that the things which weed out women and minorities weed out lots of men too. And so if we can make the culture better for women, we will be making the culture better for everybody. And so we can bring more people into the discipline by making it more accessible. And it's not to say that we don't want to strive for excellence, because if you're going to achieve at the high level in anything that you want to do, you're going to have to work on it. It's hard. But it's worth it. And you need to have the sense that it's worth it by making the process of getting there enjoyable and not just competitive.
And I think one of the things that most people don't realize, because the approach to mathematics is really limited in so many people to their school experience, and if they never take it beyond school, they don't have a reason to pick that up again. But math is implicit in almost everything we do. And it would be wonderful. I think there are a number of educators and outreach professionals who are doing a great job in trying to expand the scope of what we recognize as math. And this would also be a great opportunity to broaden the opportunities for people who are interested in math, but perhaps are turned off in some way by what they believe to be the traditional path to continuing with mathematics. Have you seen anything, and not to put you on the spot, but have you seen anything that would be considered a good working example of some of this collaboration or broadening or integration with math?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're getting so much better at that too. I mean, so we have things like the Museum of Math in New York, right? I mean, that's just a fun way to celebrate mathematics, right? And then there are, I remember the NSF had grants for bringing mathematics to community spaces, right? So maybe parks or things like that. I don't know what happened, but that's like another thing. I've always envisioned having an exercise park where each place you're doing some kind of math game, like the Hanoi tires, you have to lift the weights and put them on the next one.
The Tower of Hanoi.
So there are those, and then also then there are these fun events like the Julia Robinson Math Festival are just celebration. I mean, they're not celebrations, they're fun problems that people do that you can have they're just fun to do, right? To think about little math problems. At the research level, we're starting to have collaborative workshops. The American Institute of Mathematics runs sort of problem solving workshops. There are also workshops where you bring people in industry and in academia together to work on problems. So I think we're getting a lot better at that, but there's still room for a whole lot more, for sure.
And I would bring in the example of math fairs, which is something I've forgotten where it was first started, but there's a big program in Alberta, which is a way of introducing elementary school students to more fun things. So it's like a science fair, it's a math fair. And just working on fun problems and getting the kids to work them out and then put together a display about it and getting the parents to come in and try all the problems. It's just, again, having fun with math instead of just competing with math. I'm not sure what there is at the secondary level, but then as Cymra said, at the tertiary level, we're doing more with trying to bring undergraduate students into doing research in groups rather than just doing research in isolation. Yeah, there's the industrial problem solving workshops we have at the Fields Institute. There are, in a just slightly different way, there are programs for women in math. NSERC has not taken on this model that the NSF has of trying to get more funding outreach projects, which will just like public education of what kinds of interesting things are going on in math. And that's something that we could maybe try to have happen in the future.
I want to go back to younger students, so girls in school. And I do think that the attitudes formed at the early stage are critical for determining a path in a particular direction. But I think the elephant in the room is that family can be a very complex entity, and that's putting it very diplomatically. So a warm, encouraging environment is ideal, but as we all know, it's certainly not available to everyone. What are some of the ways that younger girls can thrive despite this lack of home advantage?
Well, teachers in schools, that's one of the most powerful things to combat or to replace a home advantage, right? That's where children are meeting other people in the community, so they're not just determined by family, right? So just making things fun. I would say that's the most important thing. Deirdre, do you have other ideas?
I would agree with that, and I don't think it's fair to put the burden on the girls themselves to say, look for a nurturing environment. That's not something you can ask a 10-year-old to do.
No.
But it really comes down to their teachers then to provide that. It helps if family are aware too that this is something that's a good thing to do, it is a possible thing to do, and that you can encourage and not try to force your children into molds. Although I should say, I say that, and then I say, I would imagine my daughter saying, well, you tried to force me into your mold. It was an unusual mold. It's not the standard mold. I hope I didn't do that.
Well, I mean, it's not different from what your parents did. And I think it's well intended. And the important thing is that wherever you end up is a place where you would have wanted to be. So I didn't ask you before when you were talking about being encouraged into the sciences, but was that something that you both would have chosen, do you think, if you hadn't been influenced by your parents?
You know, Deirdre and I, when we were growing up, Deirdre put it this way, we were talking yesterday about this, we grew up, we had a relationship where mathematics was part of it. And this was from a very young age, actually, that we would, I remember one case, we were very young. I mean, I must have been 7 or something, that Deirdre, or 8, maybe, I don't remember, but Deirdre comes home with her, you know, she's older than I am. And she has all these boring long division problems to do and really doesn't want to do them. I said, well, I'll do them for you, right? So we just had this relationship, actually, and talked about math from a very young age. But no, I suspect that if we didn't have that pressure from my family, from our parents, that I would have ended up doing music or something different. I'm pretty certain I would have, right? It was just that they were like, no, by all means, enjoy music. By all means, learn lots of languages and read a lot. And that's wonderful, but don't do that for your living. Don't make a career out of it. You know, it was very strong pressure, right? Not to do that. So.
And as you know, as adults now and professionals, what's your take on this from the other side, where you now have your own families?
I certainly encourage my daughter to be very good at school, and what she then chose to do with it was very much her own choice, and to take it in an academic direction or to take it into a very different direction, they were both absolutely fine with me. And I don't think I put any pressure on her for subject, although certainly encouraged her to believe that science is important.
One of the common stories we hear, from both of you, but also almost every woman leader in a STEM field will talk about how they were, by the time they got to university and graduate school, they were one of the only female students in their classes. This is even today. And I imagine that the higher you get up in academia, the more the number dwindles. What was your experience when you got to, I would say, the graduate and professor level? And do you think it made a lot, I mean, it clearly made a lot of difference that you had a sister in that situation, but you weren't in the same class. So you each had your own respective experience with that as you got to the PhD and beyond.
Yeah, so I think I didn't realize it at the time, but I think it made a big difference to me that I did my undergraduate at a women's college, that it just gave me a level of confidence going into the subject that as an undergraduate, I didn't feel any pressure at all not to be successful at what I was doing. And then when I got to graduate school, I was in my year of admission, there were 3 women, but in the years above us, there were none. There was only 1. And so the graduate school experience was really very isolating, that I had gone from this environment where I had plenty of people to talk about math with, and then I moved to this new environment where really I was made to feel very unwelcome. And
how so?
I think this goes back to the individual versus the system again. I think that any individual that I spoke to would have said, oh, I wasn't unwelcoming. I never intended to be unwelcoming in any way, but the collective were totally unwelcoming. And
do you have an example? Do you have an example of how that played out? I mean, without implicating anyone. Right?
One particular example is that we had a graduate student lounge, And it was a pit. It was horrible. It was just like, I don't know, there were empty bottles, the beer bottles, there were girly pictures on the walls. It was not a place that I wanted to go into at all. And that was where the graduate students would sit around and talk math and learn to talk math, because that's a skill that you need to learn, which I felt totally excluded from. And Cymra has a little story about this. But I think that is, this comes back to the culture, which is that in graduate school, everybody's really working to stand out from the rest. And in order to have an in-group like that, there has to be an out-group.
Yes.
And so everybody's trying not to be in an out-group. And the person who stands out as a woman is kind of automatically in the out-group. And the only way to change that is for everybody to look around and say, I don't have to be this struggling for the top. I can succeed on my own merits. I don't have to be seen to be succeeding, and to look out for everybody else. And whether that's something you can expect of human nature, I don't know.
What did you do to mitigate some of that discomfort?
I just kind of took my behavior that I had used in school and just said, I'll just ignore all those people and go on with what I'm doing.
But do you feel like, having had to do that, you also missed out perhaps on some opportunities or some advancement?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And
so the story about the graduate student lounge. But Deirdre, as she mentioned, she was one of 3 women in her year, probably out of maybe 15 or something. So come my year, I came 2 years later to Stanford, and I think we were another 3, but I think it became that there was critical mass. There became more women in the department. And then, so Deirdre, says one day, let's all get together and clean up the graduate student lounge. And I was like, see, I had just come from a technical university that was very male dominated. In math, it wasn't so bad. In math, it was probably 20% women, but just in the school as a whole, it was, the mining was notorious for being just notorious for very male dominated, very sexist, and so I just felt like that was the way life was, right? I really didn't think to question it, to be honest with you. And so Deirdre says, let's clean up the graduate student lounge. Like, gosh, yeah, we could do that. Why does it have to be like that? We don't have to. Right?
Well, you bring up such an important point, which is what we're taught to accept as the way things are. But there's also, on the other hand, some very real consequences for people who are the first of that group to say, wait a minute, I'm not okay with this anymore, right? And always those first waves of people who have the courage to stand up and say, have to prepare for, some backlash. Did you find any of that when you decided to put those beer bottles in the garbage?
As far as I remember, all the rest of the graduate students were okay with it. As far as I remember, I don't really remember very well. Do you remember, Deirdre?
No, I don't remember any. There wasn't a backlash, but there was a little bit the sense that, well, the girls can take care of that.
Right. I guess it's okay as long as
reason for not.
Right. As long as you're doing something that they traditionally associate with women, right? Like cleaning up. Right?
Right.
And as you went on past the PhD into postdoc or teaching, did things change?
Well, it becomes a different atmosphere. You're not. You're more on the top of things, but you certainly feel it, being the only woman or one of a small number of women in a department with lots of men. You notice it. You notice that your interactions with people are a little bit different. I've had students tell me that I was the only female professor they'd ever had in the math department. And it made a difference to them that they would notice something like this. I mean, you can, I would certainly say that at times I do feel that my contributions to the department are not really acknowledged. That if I make a change in the department, that becomes something that the department does, and nobody really notices that I was actually the one who made it that way, and it can be kind of annoying.
And it's not, and it's not the same for some of your male colleagues.
Well, it's hard to tell because you notice things that affect yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Cymra,
but I certainly think it's an important point is to know the difference between is this something which is happening to me because I'm a woman, or just to me because of something else, or is this something that I'm just noticing and it's happening to everybody? And it's not until you get together and see how it compare that you can start to realize that maybe this is something which is more systematic. And we've had in the news recently about the gender gap in pay scales and on Bay Street. And this is something that was also, was it 5 years ago that all the female professors at MIT got together and said, wait a minute, why is my salary lower? Wait a minute, why is my lab smaller? And they actually did a comparison and said, yeah, this is something which is the women are getting poorly treated. It's not just each individual. And actually, this brings up a few years ago, the then president of the McMaster University Faculty Association did a salary comparison between the men and the women and said, no, there is a gender disparity here. Let's actually make a change. And I didn't even know it was happening at the time. And then I got a letter from the president saying, okay, your salary is going up by this amount because we're addressing this gender disparity. And I didn't know that it was the president of MUFA who had done that. So I should say, thank you, Michelle Dion, for making that happen, because you really went in there and did it.
and that's what it demands, people in a position to be able to do something about it, saying, okay, this needs to stop. Right? And here's what I'm going to do about it. And that sets a new precedent for it. But you're right. I think, it's tricky right now because we're at a moment where all of this is out there, and women and girls are feeling a little more comfortable now expressing things that are unfair and systemic. The problem is humans are complex. So you can get into a situation where sometimes it's difficult to tease apart whether this is something that has just happened to you, a person, or something that has happened to you because you're female. Mm-hmm. And these are the discomforts that we're going to have to learn how to navigate as we get more mature in creating more equitable systems. But it's tricky. It is really tricky. And something else that's tricky, I think, is the generational divide. You both came through school at a very different time than young women and girls today. And I think one of the attitudes that is developing among some younger women, not all, some younger women, is a backlash to what they may perceive as feminism, because the problems that earlier generations fought for appear, at least on the surface, to be solved. So they're saying, hey, look, we don't have to deal with this anymore. Let's focus on something else. I don't think that's the case. I'm curious what both of you have experienced in this regard.
So when we were coming up through, as undergraduates, or even before that, when we were at high school, I think we would have said the same thing. That, oh, this was a battle that was fought, that was already fought, that we don't have to fight anymore. And then having lived through it, you realize, oh, no, oh, gosh, there was a lot there to deal with, right? So I think that it actually, in some ways, it hasn't changed very much. I think the situation has changed for women. I think it is better than it was, but it's still, we're still not there, right? I would say it's always been the case that the word feminism has been given a bad name. Right? I mean, it's or yeah, probably always the case, but that's almost, and I mean, and that's a tactic, I mean, conscious or not, that somebody might use to discredit the movement, right? If you associate the word feminism with something that it doesn't mean, and that people don't want it to mean, like women acting like men, being masculine, which should be permissible, but that it shouldn't be a requirement of the word feminist. Then that's a way to discredit the movement. And then people don't want to be feminists, and so then they're not looking for women's rights. So but most people that are against feminism will still talk about being for women's rights. So it's almost a semantic issue, but it's an important one because because it stops people from fighting for women's rights, perhaps, right?
Yes. Before we continue, I just want to mention that we are taking questions. So if you have any questions that you would like to pose, please send them to communications@fields.utoronto.ca, and we'll try to get those in as well. Deirdre, did you want to pick this one out as well?
Yeah, I would agree with Cymra, everything Cymra said, and I'd say I think that the things have improved. I think that the kind of some of the overt sexism that we both experienced, or I'm sure I experienced, is no longer possible. But I think that there are a lot of ingrained attitudes which are still communicated by our culture. I thought my daughter put this quite well, and when she told me in school, one time in school, that if a boy was good at math, that was weird, but in a good way. But if a girl was good at math, that was weird in a bad way. And that's a very subtle thing, but it's the kind of attitude that we want to try to fight. And I don't know how you set about fighting it, except by having role models, making it a possibility, making it something real that people can do, making it into something which our culture approves of instead of disapproving of.
On a practical level, both of you as educators, what can teachers do at the primary level and beyond to encourage this welcoming and supportive educational environment?
I think making math fun. It's just where everybody likes it. And so then it's not weird to like it. It's like, and that should be true of any discipline, right? That it's not weird to excel and be good at something is wonderful. It doesn't matter what it is. And so I think that's probably the most important thing we can do is to get rid of the society's or our culture's idea that math is not fun. Right? That really it's a really fun thing to do.
And I remember my mother saying at some point that she would hear Cymra and me in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, saying something totally incomprehensible and then laughing about it. And it's like, but yeah, for us and for having each other there was somebody to talk about math and really enjoy it.
So perhaps broadening communities that are geared toward inclusion in a different way, not having the idea of inclusion, forced down everyone's throats in the sense that this is why we're doing it, but perhaps to diversify the types of math clubs or initiatives or programs, even at the earlier stages, that can give people a choice and can give girls a choice of perhaps where to find a group where they feel more connected.
Mm-hmm. I would say I wouldn't say so much even the earlier stages. I would say maybe most importantly, the earlier stages. I think at all stages, but I think really at the earlier stages, that's when math is a very cumulative subject, that what we do, in year 2 builds on what we did in year 1, and it's a tower. And so if you're shaky and down underneath, then the whole tower can fall apart. So I would say it's like really super important that at the very elementary level that kids are learning math in a way that they're playing with it, so that they're flexible thinkers and they can build on what, rather than learning procedures, they're learning ideas and playing that we build on.
And I think also just the connection, the practical connection to math in the real world is so important, especially for young students, so that they don't look at things as just a set of problems that they have to solve for a grade, but it actually makes sense why they would be learning something like this. And from my own daughter, my daughter's in grade 1, and I see her homework, and there's a lot more of that than there was when I was a kid. And I think that educators are doing a really, really excellent and sophisticated job at integrating that in the earlier stages. We do have a question. This is coming from one of our viewers, and the question is, what is the likelihood that young girls will have fun with math when their teachers are terrified of math?
Well, that's a problem. Yeah. So I think one thing is really important to do at the university level is to make sure that we are teaching the future elementary school teachers and the maths in a way that they can move beyond their own elementary education. And I think the problem is that a lot of our elementary school teachers, what they learned of math was that it was just this formulaic, do this procedure. If you don't do it the way I told you to, then it's wrong. And so that's the only thing that they know to teach. And we need to reach out to those teachers in order to allow them to learn that math is more than that and more flexible than that. I mean, there still is usually a right answer, but that the way that you get that right answer can happen in a lot of different ways. And that's a job for us at the university to be teaching to realize the really crucial importance of teaching this elementary mathematics in a way that the teachers can take with them into the classroom.
And I want to say that we're doing that to some extent. This is another place where we were getting better, that we have AIM, the American Institute of Mathematics, started these math teacher circles. So these are places where teachers get together and work on fun math problems so it allows the teachers to have an experience that we want them to be able to emulate with their kids, right? That where they're having fun doing math. And yeah.
So I think having support networks all the way down, not just for students, but also for educators, is crucial in this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Going back now to the home, what can parents do perhaps to emulate some of the support that you both had in your household? I mean, without expecting everyone to suddenly become, a pedagogical master. If you have a girl at home and she has expressed either an interest in math or an ability in math, how can you as a parent help encourage that learning to go beyond the classroom and perhaps beyond high school?
Just praise her for what she's doing well.
And maybe ask her questions about her math, about what she's doing.
Yeah.
There's some research that praising somebody for their intelligence is actually counterproductive, right? That you praise them for their hard work, and
Yes.
this is because that
or their curiosity,
or their curiosity, absolutely. Yeah. Right. So, but just allowing, recognizing that that's asking questions, say, to express interest as a parent. If a parent express interest, then that's endowing their child with agency, right? And that their belief in their own ability to do mathematics.
So my last question may be impossible to answer, but I think it's important to pose regardless of the result. One of the greatest laments among people who are fighting to increase the seats at the table everywhere across the board is to mourn the loss of all the contributions that could have been made by women, by underrepresented groups, especially in fields like math or business or what have it. The other problem is that none of this will be solved overnight. We can acknowledge this and we can say this is the point at which now everything has to begin, but it's going to take some time. In the meantime, though, there are countless women and minority groups who at this very moment are fighting to do great work, but may not be able to ever fully realize their potential. What can we do now to speed up that process?
I think we just have to remember that we all have to try every day to make a difference and to believe that we can make a difference. I'm not sure there's any point in mourning the loss of the past, but to look forward to trying to do everything we can to bring all of those people in to the discipline and in whatever way they can as we go.
And those people that we might otherwise mourn might have done wonderful things in other disciplines too, right? So maybe they shouldn't be mourned after all. I don't.
All right, that's fair. Are there any last words that either of you would like to make? It can be about anything from your experience when you were young to your experience teaching younger women. The floor is yours.
Well, I'd like to say thank you to Cymra for being my mathematical sister. And we still talk about math a lot.
Yeah.
Have the nature of those conversations changed?
Oh, of course. We know more now, so we don't have to talk about trig identities anymore.
So a family gathering at the dinner table, what would that sound like?
How many when you cheer, how many clinks of the glass are there?
Yeah, that's the kind of thing we talk about. or what all the different ways that you can represent a number of using candles on a birthday cake.
But see, these are exactly the examples of some of the real world applications that is missing.
There we go.
All right, well, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to talk about this and to share your experiences with the girls and women and hopefully men and boys watching. And we will check in. We'll be doing more of these conversations around women and girls and underrepresented groups and what we can do to just do better. So on behalf of Fields, thanks for watching and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you,
Thank you, Jordana.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.